There we go. Okay. They have one and two.
Four categories. One, I'll share some data from the Episcopal Church in Cathedral, and just get your opinion on other trends and data you're aware of. And it'll be very conversational. The second category is, I need 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute. The second category Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Dean's Forum. My name is Richard Lawson, and I am joined by Dr. Lee Butler, whom I will introduce in just a moment. But we're really glad that all of you are here in person, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us on the live stream as well. I'll open with prayer and then introduce Dr. Butler, and then we'll dive in. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you for this day and this chance to gather in this place with one of your church's great scholars and leaders, Dr. Butler. Be with us as we think about your presence in our lives, your presence in this world, and look at all the patterns changing as they are for how we gather as your body, your church. In Christ's name we pray, amen. Come in, everyone. Come on in. So we're joined for the second week in a row by Dr. Lee Butler. Lee is the president and CEO of Aleph School of Theology, with which the Cathedral has a long-standing and wonderful relationship. I'll highlight just two fruits of that relationship, although I could name many others. One is we have an annual Everding Interfaith Lecture that is co-sponsored by Aleph and the Cathedral, that is thanks to a wonderful benefactor who was a member of the Cathedral, God rest her soul, Lee Everding. And Lee's husband, God rest his soul, was a professor at Aleph. And so we'll have this fall our annual Everding Lecture, which your office has already been in touch with ours, and we know who that speaker will be. So more to come about that for fall. A second long-standing relationship between the Cathedral and ILF that's almost the most important one is a number of our clergy have had various sorts of training at ILF. Most significantly in the present moment, I see the Reverend Canon Katie Pearson in a cassock in the back of the room. She's our great preacher for the day. And in fact, her MDiv is from ILF School of Theology. So we give thanks for that. ILF has taught Katie Pearson a thing or two. And then I also noticed Catherine Lawson enter the room, and Catherine Lawson is a member here, of course, of the Cathedral and a member of Dr. Butler's board at ILF. So all kinds of connections between the two. Dr. Butler has a PhD in theology from Drew University. He is a published author. He leads a great institution, and I've had the privilege of hearing him speak and preach a couple of times, and he is has a profound voice. He is gifted in the ways of being both clear and subtle, and I think that's often a great gift, and it's great to have you back. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any commentary about that member of your board named Catherine Lawson?
We love her.
Make sure your mic's on. Yeah, it is. It is. We might turn it up just a hair if you don't mind. Oh, perfect. So, where I want to begin, we're going to move through 4 different sections in our conversation together. We're going to look at some data that I'm going to supply to Dr. Butler and get his thoughts on from the Episcopal Church and the Cathedral here, attendance, things like that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about seminaries, some data I'm aware of, very aware of, about seminary attendance in the Episcopal Church, who's going where, how that's going, how that's working. Third, we're going to shift into thinking about, I want Dr. Butler's opinion on, the data is really, really helpful, profoundly helpful. I couldn't live without it. And I've seen leaders use data to justify in the present what they want to do in a way that's not always transparent or helpful, frankly. We can all use numbers to justify any number of things that might not be Spirit-led or helpful to the community. And then the fourth thing we're going to look at is what's sometimes called the secularization thesis. Are we living in a secular world, and what does that mean? Secularization is a term that I think always needs to be held lightly and always looked at critically, because it can be used also like data to justify a number of decisions in the present moment. Okay, you ready? Let's do what I just said I was going to do. How about that? Okay, every year, and we're about to do it here at the Cathedral, every Episcopal church is required to turn in some numbers on something called the parochial report. And let me just say my opinion on numbers. Numbers are profoundly helpful, and they tell us something, but not everything. Numbers are never as interesting as a story, for example. But numbers give us a kind of perspective on how things are going. So this parochial report that we'll turn in on March 1st will be for the numbers in 2025. And then what the Episcopal Church does is takes all of those numbers from throughout the Episcopal Church and turns them into a report and tries to look at some trends, okay? So the data I have right now is based on 2024 numbers throughout the Episcopal Church. And I want to share just some of these things with all of you, and then look at how they, in terms of the data you're aware of, what's surprising, what's not surprising about what I share. So for us here at the Cathedral, I think the biggest thing to think, one of the most important things to think about in terms of numbers, and I presented this to the vestry a year ago, and they found it enlightening or helpful. We here at the Cathedral attend every Sunday and for all our sacramental services an enormous Episcopal church. So on paper, we have 2,200 people who are members, and that's really accurate. We work on that every year and try to make that an accurate number. There's zero reason to inflate it. So we have about 2,200 members. Our average Sunday attendance last year in 2025 was 600 and about 630, if I remember from the annual report. So 630, okay? So 630 people here on average come to the 8 a.m. service, the 10:30 a.m. service, and the 5 p.m. service, and throw in some even songs like this afternoon. You follow me? Now, if you take that number and look at it at the median in the Episcopal Church, what are most Episcopalians doing in terms of the church size? What are most churches like in the Episcopal Church? So our average is 630. The median average in the Episcopal Church, how many people think it's between 100 and 200? Raise your hand. How many people think it's above 200? Raise your hand. How many people think it's below 100? Raise your hand. You got it. The median in the Episcopal Church, and I'm looking at it for 2024, is 38. The reason why that comes as a kind of shock to most people in this room is because you go to church here. Now, a couple of different things about that, why that's a helpful piece of data, really helpful. For us as clergy, one of the things we're very aware of, and the staff is very aware of, that means that most people who come and join the Cathedral from another Episcopal church are coming from a small Episcopal church. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And just sometimes if you come from a small Episcopal church into this ginormous system, it's just different. And the onboarding needs to take that into account. It's impossible, as all of you know, to run this place like a church that has a median attendance of 38. Now, one more piece of data that makes everything more interesting, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Whereas the median is 38 in the Episcopal Church, the majority of Episcopalians come from larger churches. So, if we've got over 600 here at the Cathedral, you can safely say, even though there are dozens of small churches, Episcopal churches in Metro Denver, most Episcopalians in Denver are coming where? To the Cathedral. And that's another dynamic where throughout the Episcopal Church, most of our membership is in larger churches, but most of our churches are tiny by these standards. Do you see that in other pieces of data? Does that surprise you in any way?
There's a yes.
Let's switch. Yeah, we'll just go back.
There's a yes and a no in that. So then in my preparation for being with you today, I began thinking about the phenomena of megachurches.
Yeah.
That we don't hear so much about them anymore, but that's where a lot of the church growth is happening.
Yeah.
So that as you talk about the Cathedral and the median and where folks are coming from, it sort of fits into that same pattern of that movement of megachurch, of folks leaving smaller churches to go to the megachurch because they are getting the services. And the services aren't always what we would consider ministry services. They have their coffee shops and other kinds of services that folks are finding appealing and attractive. Yeah. My next thought as you were running through all that, as you talk about the numbers and how we follow the numbers, I'm like, okay, here's what we have to do at Iliff to serve the church.
In what sense?
Well, if there is one mega church in Denver and all the other congregations are size 38 members,
Right.
we can't just serve the Cathedral.
Right.
we have to serve those other churches.
Absolutely.
And what does that mean to offer resources and education for those members?
So, you and I have not talked about this, and I'm sorry to bring this up for all of you. So I've just been elected bishop in Alabama, and if you think you're thinking about that question, right? So in Alabama, there are 86 churches. I bet, and this is totally opposite of the Diocese of Colorado, of the 86 in Alabama, I bet you there are 10 that have membership of 1,000 or more. Those are big churches, right? So there are a lot of big churches in Alabama that fit the overall data in the Episcopal Church perfectly. Most Episcopalians in Alabama are going to be in those 10, 11, 12 churches, but yet they're going to be 65, 70 more that are smaller that's going to be trending toward that median of 38 or a little more, right? And so how do we care for all of those? I mean, it's urgent. And then what does flourishing look like at various levels of scale? And then for us in the Episcopal Church, which is one of the very important questions, is our original vision as Episcopalians, which has something noble in it and something colonial and horrible in it too, and I'll speak to both sides of it. Our vision was to be a national church. And I think what's incredible still about that is it means that we believe the gospel and gathering as a body is not something for Denver, it's also something for rural areas in Colorado. It's not just something for the city of Birmingham, it's also for my hometown in Gunnersville. We're related, we are for the whole country in a sense. The colonial, terrible side of that is we only planted largely churches in white parts of town. So we don't need to be naive about our broad vision. We had the broad vision, but we didn't implement it gracefully in a spirit-led way. And so it's how does a church like Catholicism that wants to have a broad reach, how it does that and how it structures it is of critical importance.
I don't know when you tuned in last week.
I watched all of it.
Okay, so
but I watched it after. I was not live in real time.
Okay, so you heard me sing
No, I didn't hear you sing. When did you sing?
at the very beginning.
I must have missed the beginning then.
I sang, I know another bishop, I know another bishop.
Oh, I did miss that. Yeah, no.
So that as you're talking about this being on your mind,
Yeah.
that's also on my mind. How can ILIF support the work that you're doing
Right,
among those churches there in Alabama?
right.
What ministry resources do we need to bring? I mean, given that much of what we do is online, to your location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the online piece is a huge piece of it. From the data throughout the Episcopal Church in 2024, 49% of Episcopal churches now have online services. That number's too low, right? And what we do here at the Cathedral that I think will be a permanent part of who we are, and it'll transform in the decades to come, I'm sure. There are pieces of the future we can't imagine. But we are truly a hybrid congregation. We have online membership. We have people who only come online. And then we have a lot of people who start out online and use online as a front porch reality. Like, I'm going to check them out on the front porch before I show up and see what they're like in person. So I think that's a huge piece. So the next thing I would love to have your comments on, and I want to shift to thinking about seminaries. So in the Episcopal Church right now, and we've got really good data on it because we have a really good pension fund that needs to keep up with however many clergy they need to give pension to and other things. So they keep good data, as you can imagine. And right now, annually in the Episcopal Church, we have on average 400 retirements on average, and about 200 ordinations annually on average. So a 200-person gap right there. Now, if Katie Pearson had the microphone, I bet she would say a couple things that go like this. That's inexcusable. We've got plenty of people we got in the ordination process here at the Cathedral, and they're doing great. A couple of them are at ILF with Dr. Butler, and we just need to be more strategic and really raise up people. And I think Katie's largely right. Now, the Cathedral alone can't close that gap, but we've got plenty of people here at the Cathedral in the ordination process. We were at about 8 or 9 last year, and they're all outstanding, and there are plenty more of you coming. The Spirit of God is still calling people to be priests and deacons in the Episcopal Church, which is great. But it's a real problem. The other piece that's a factor for seminaries that Dr. Butler knows only too well is that right now, approximately in the Episcopal Church, right now throughout all of those Episcopal churches with a median ASA of 38, exactly 1/2 of the priests work full-time. 1/2. So Katie, Paul, and I, and Jack all work full-time, right? But throughout the whole Episcopal Church, only half of our clergy are employed full-time. That is a massive change from 25, 50 years ago, and it's a massive complexity because in our tradition, the priest is not just somebody who stands in vestments up at the altar, God forbid, or preach sermons, but is also somebody who comes to see you in the hospital, is somebody you can make an appointment with, is somebody you can do discernment for ministry for, whatever form it takes. So it's a full-time shepherding job, Monday through Friday in addition to Sunday. Those numbers, I'm sure, don't surprise you in any way.
Not at all. And it is a challenge within theological education because the life of the church has changed so significantly. How do we prepare religious leaders, folks for ordination, when most of the churches that they're going to be called to will not be able to offer them full-time support? And we know that even when the church is only calling a priest for half-time ministry, it's still full-time work. And with that comes burnout. So how do we pay attention to even that portion of ministry preparation in theological education to help folks not only develop what we used to call tent-making ministries. Right. At one point we said bivocational. Now it's really multi-vocational. Most of us can't survive on simply 2 positions. We need to pull together lots of different positions in order to survive and for our families to survive and to still offer good ministry to folks. And so I have been talking about this for a number of years with the different theological institutions I've been a part of, and talking about it now at ILF. And ILF has a wonderful tradition, a wonderful legacy, but it hasn't kept up necessarily with how to prepare folks for these kinds of realities. And so one way that we're moving into this is to emphasize care ministries more. In doing that, it opens up more opportunities for folks to be centered in who they are while they're doing other kinds of vocations.
What would an example, if I may interrupt, of a care ministry? What do you mean by that? I think I know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know that my primary formation was pastoral care and counseling. Right. And so moving that out, we move into the minister of pastoral care in a local congregation, but who also might be a chaplain at a hospice or a hospital, some other kind of institution, historically, folks would do the MDiv and the social work degree, which would still be a care ministry. We're looking at folks now who are engaged in the spiritual discernment parts of things, doing spiritual companionship, which is another kind of counseling ministry. So there are different ways that we can exercise our gifts without fragmenting ourselves.
And what the term we use here that at the Cathedral, when Katie and others of us talk about spiritual directors, we mean by that, I think, the exact same thing that Dr. Butler means by spiritual friendship or companionship. So a spiritual director can be a clergy, but it's often a lay person trained in the ways of spirituality. It's not a psychologist, nor should that ever be confused, but accompanies you in your life of prayer and discernment in various ways. You could meet with them up to monthly, quarterly. There are various models for it, but a very important and historic ministry across denominations.
Absolutely, and we've been thinking about that, or at least I've been thinking about that at ILIF, to support the church.
Would you say a little bit about what do you see, any trends that you see with your Anglican Episcopal students at ILIF, or is that hard to say? Trends is such a big word, but anything you notice there, anything in terms of Anglican studies going forward that'd be helpful to share, or is it still a little early on all of that?
Well, we've had the Anglican Studies program at ILIF, and I have proposed that we grow that into an Anglican House of Studies.
Interesting.
That we offer the full range of formation that is necessary for the church to be the church. I've talked about, since we just mentioned spirituality, talked about offerings, course offerings that will help folks to develop in their spiritual journey and develop those skills to be spiritual directors, spiritual companions. But we also know that ILIF, being the place that it is, a place that has focused on social justice. The Anglican students, the Episcopal students that I know, they're sometimes caught between the two worlds. I am committed to social justice, grassroots organizing, but I'm feeling called to the priesthood. And they don't necessarily see those two things going together. And so it really is, again, this helping folks to be clear about who they are in the center of themselves, that they don't have to be fragmented doing this one moment and that another and being expressed as two different people. That you can be passionate about social justice as a priest in the church.
Absolutely. I assume the vast majority of your students, Episcopal or otherwise, are now hybrid. Would you say a little bit just about the makeup of the percentage that's hybrid versus what we used to call residential?
Percentage, I just have to say majority. Yeah. We have very few theologues, seminarians that come to ILIF that will relocate from wherever they are in the nation and move to Denver. We have the gathering days, which is every semester students will come to campus for a week to study with their classmates and their professors in the classroom, face to face. But most of the education is online, both synchronous and asynchronous. And now we're doing what is called high flex. High flex is where you'll have folks in the classroom and online at the same time, synchronous learning. And we have a high flex classroom where there will be a whiteboard that folks will see in the classroom, but the whiteboard will also be reflected online so that there is no real distancing between the learners. So we've had to really change our model of delivery and what it means to be a professor. And it's very different from when I started. You know, I was in the classroom 30 years before I moved into administration. I work best this way.
Sure.
How do you do pastoral care and counseling online?
Yeah, lots of questions about this. So what I'm going to do right now, so we've got a seminarian who the Spirit led to be here this morning, and I didn't know you were coming, Bradley. So coming up, Bradley. So this is Bradley Jackson. Bradley is a seminarian from the Cathedral. And I'm going to give Bradley the microphone because it's a perfect opportunity to talk about it. Bradley is studying at Bexley, and he's doing it online. Do you mind just saying what your day job is and then what you're doing at Bexley?
Thank you, Richard. So yes, I'm Bradley Jackson. I am in the Master of Divinity program at Bexley Seabury, which is a program based in Chicago, but most of the education is through our Zoom classes online. So every single week, I have a series of asynchronous assignments that I complete, and then we meet for Zoom classes in the evenings online. We also do gathering days in Chicago in August and in May of every year. For me, this provided access to go to seminary because during the day, I'm the principal of the middle school at Kent Denver. So I have a job that spans 40 plus hours a week. But I also, you know, the Spirit has also placed on my heart this sense of call for a very long time. And one of the barriers to accessing seminary is the fact that financially I cannot afford to move to a different city, to not work, and to attend a seminary for 3 years. And so through this program at Bexley Seabury, I am able to access seminary. I'm able to pursue this call in addition to continuing my day job as well. And I've been talking a lot with the bishop and with my spiritual director about what bivocational ministry might look like in seeing education as a form of ministry and what might it look like for us as a church to engage our young people and get creative about the ways in which we grow the church as well. So,
Bradley, thank you truly so much.
Before you move away from that comment, you know that I was in Chicago for 24 years at Chicago Theological Seminary. What you may not know is that Bexley was located inside of Chicago Theological Seminary. And so those seminarians were often in Chicago Theological Seminary classes. I bring this up not only to say, I know where you go, but it becomes another one of those moments that I'm talking about of how do we prepare folks to do good ministry. So we had in Chicago Theological Seminary, which is United Church of Christ, Bexley, which is Episcopalian, in the same building with the classes being offered, available to both denominations. And so ecumenical theological preparation is very important to me. We have to be able to talk to one another, but be in relationship with one another, which means we have to know something about one another. That was a good opportunity for Chicago Theological Seminary, and I'm saying this vision that I have for ILIF with the Anglican House of Studies, where the students will interact with one another. We will be able to worship with one another. We will be able to march with one another. So I just wanted to add that before you moved on.
Yeah, that's outstanding. So just two quick things about Bradley and Bexley, and then we'll start to shift a little bit. So one, the preaching professor for Bexley is an Episcopal priest in Birmingham, Alabama, whom I got to meet last week when I preached at Diocesan Convention. And Kelly Hudlow, and Bradley's in a preaching class right now. So I preached at convention in front of what felt like the world, and seated next to me, vested because she had part in this service, was Kelly Hudlow. And after I finished the sermon, I said, "How to do?" Because it was funny I thought it was funny, to preach in front of a preaching professor. She gave me a grade, and I won't tell you what it is. So I really wasn't asking for a grade. Now, thinking about Bradley, and this is just me speculating, what the Episcopal Church needs, we've got hundreds of Episcopal schools of various sizes across this country, hundreds. Some are profoundly dynamic. What Bradley is doing, in my humble opinion, is exactly what we need the church to do with some of our people going to seminary, which is keep your day job at Kent, go get a good seminary education, and God willing, in 5, 10, however many years, and I hope Kent's not listening, we want Bradley to be a head of an Episcopal school with a collar on somewhere in the country. Now, the Lord might call you to do any number of things, but this is a dream for the Episcopal Church, to have Bradley keeping his position and still going to seminary. Follow me? Okay, now, what is equally true, that in my humble opinion is getting lost in a lot of dioceses, is that our residential seminaries in the Episcopal Church right now are thriving. And there are not enough bishops talking about this. So right now, we have 4 seminaries in the Episcopal Church: Virginia, Swanee, the seminary in Austin, and Berkeley at Yale, where Christina Salzer just finished, Rutland, our youth minister, that offer tuition-free health care, and even a couple of housing, and even a couple of them offer a stipend. Now, not every one of our clergy can go there, nor should they, i.e., we were just talking about Bradley, but we still need, in the Diocese of Alabama, the majority of their seminarians are still going to residential, and that's a good thing. What we're trying to figure out is how to offer basically multiple paths to a good thing for clergy. So please keep all of our seminaries, but especially those 4 in your thoughts and prayers. And if you yourself were ever discerning about seminary for priesthood or diaconate, there are 4 outstanding seminaries where you will not pay $1 to go there. So this is a great moment. Wouldn't you say, Katie, it's a great moment for Episcopal seminary education? Yeah. What that means is I'm supposed to shift. I could tell. Okay, what we're going to shift to, and I just would love just your just mere opinion on this, Dr. Butler. One of the deans, the dean, the Episcopal priest, the danger of data. He says, first of all, data is never complex enough for complex reality, A. And B, the ultimate danger is what he calls the self-fulfilling prophecy, that leaders use numbers to justify in reality how they want to lead, and they themselves are largely in charge of getting the institution to the future. So we need to have a healthy dose of critical thinking when we see any leader, myself included, using data alone to justify decision-making for the future. What are your thoughts on, does that strike a nerve?
It tickles my funny bone. Because when you use data to further your own agenda, it is eisegesis and proof texting. And of course, we like to say eisegesis, but it's really not. It's not always using the data in the best form. It becomes abusive sometimes, and we just have to be aware of that and acknowledge that. Now, as you've pointed out, data can be valuable, but we also need to be cautious of who's interpreting the data. So the data comes to us, and it comes with an interpretation, and we can follow that. We could say, The data is showing that the church is dying. But when you look around, you're like, what churches are you looking at? And so I'm just always cautious about data.
Yeah, and just one to give a piece of data to illustrate that. The median age in the Episcopal Church is 60. Now, when Patrick Lannon and Enrique did a study of our growth at the Cathedral a year or so ago, the majority of our new members who go through the sacramental rites, baptism, confirmation, and the majority of our newcomer cards, correct me if I'm wrong, are young adults. So if you only, you've got to look, data could be misleading. If you had a preacher stand up and say, we're median age in the Episcopal Church is 60, we need to put more and more resources into ministry for 60 plus. We do put resources into that. But let's forget about younger generations because that's dying off. That is profoundly untrue at the Cathedral. All right, so here's where I want to land the plane. And then we'll take questions. Dr. Butler and I'll take some questions. Behind a lot of this and the use of numbers is often people will say we're living in a secular world. And I think we need to be careful and ask a lot of questions about what does that exactly mean? Say more. Because as I observe the way institutions gather, yes, I see some decline in some places and a lot of places in terms of attendance and membership throughout mainline denominations. I see some uptick in specific places like the Cathedral. So that's complex. But when I look around at other institutions, things like art galleries or the Rotary Club or all kinds of organizations where people gather in public, a lot of those institutions are sometimes struggling too. So it's not just about religion. It's also about the ways in which we gather in this world. But I just want to offer, the way I think about religion or spirituality, I think because it comes from God, I don't think it can ever die. I think it just changes. So I think if you could imagine a scenario in which you snapped your fingers and there were no churches, no mosques, no synagogues, literally no temples, no literal physical places to gather anywhere on God's globe, if all of those houses of prayer were immediately gone, I don't think religion would go away. I think it would go underground. I think we would find ways of praying, however inarticulate or confused. We would, for example, when a relative, someone we loved, died, there might not be a minister to stand beside us in that moment, but I guarantee you, if you lost your spouse, God forbid lost your child, you would pause as you're letting go of that person. In some way, some form, some fashion, there would be a pause. So just what do you think on, what are your thoughts on all of that?
There is truly in all of that you just said. You said more than one thing in there. And I've had several thoughts along with that. Secularization versus the sacred versus the secular. Some of that for me is related to where we started, where I talked about the megachurch phenomena, where I have a challenge with adapting ministries to be business models. And that's where a lot of the secularization comes in, where church growth models are based upon business models as opposed to church growth models being based on ministry models that we find in the life of Jesus. So that's one thing. And where you talk about snapping the finger, there's an ideology that really has snapped the finger and tried to move religion away with this whole idea of I'm spiritual, not religious. Right. And in that spiritual, not religious, is moving more towards that individualism, which is anti-Christian.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because Christian is communal. And if you're going to really push this I'm spiritual, I don't need to gather in community, that's what gets pushed in what you were just describing. And yet, because of the way I shared last week, that I understand religion, given one of my mentors, as orientation, religion doesn't go away. We are still fundamentally religious beings, but we can move into that individualism away from community. And there's much in society today that is advocating that.
Fascinating, but we probably should open it up for questions. I'd love to say a lot, and that is so interesting. So if you've got a question, if you'll raise your hand and say your name, and if someone's ahead of you, keep your hand up just so I can catch your eye.
Scott Barker, thank you, Dr. Butler. I was here last week and also today, and it's marvelous to have you with us. Congratulations, Richard. I have a good friend who, longtime committed Christian, who doesn't go to church anymore. But what he does do is every week he leads a Bible study amongst a group of his friends. And so I guess my question is, two questions. Number one, has anybody tracked that kind of data? That's an anecdote, but I'm wondering if there's any data that shows how many people are doing that instead of going to church. And do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, the small group approach to Christianity?
Yeah, I'll say two quick things and then turn it over to Dr. Butler. One, I'm not aware of any data. Two, basically, I think it's largely a good thing. So basically, church through the centuries has been based on a gathering model. Like, we're going to gather on Sundays. And in the Episcopal Church, it's been gathering around one piece of property, a parcel of land, one church building, and historically one full-time minister or priest. And that we do this, and it's got a bright future here at the Cathedral and a lot of places throughout the Episcopal Church. What I would love to see is both a gathering and ascending happening constantly, so that you get the gathered community coming together on Sundays, and then you get just a multitude of things out there like Bible studies, service opportunities, that are Christian, Episcopalian, however you want to put it, but aren't tightly controlled by Katie Pearson and Paul and me and others, right? Because sometimes you don't need us to be in charge of the organization of all of that.
As you began to speak about that, I thought about the history of house churches. And you have a place like the Cathedral that will still have a house church. That was one thought. Another thought was that brother needs some discernment because he's been called to ministry and he's offering leadership and hasn't recognized that he is being a priest.
Mm-hmm. I think Ames and then Catherine.
Ames McGinnis. My whole life has related to the survival of small state colleges in rural areas. And the problem is that the larger universities basically suck resources and students away from those institutions. University of Illinois and Champaign-Urbana celebrated a giant enrollment increase, yet Eastern and Western Illinois just basically are collapsing in enrollment. So my question is, what can be done at the level of the larger churches and at the diocese level to really promote collaboration, not only within a diocese, but also across denominations, to promote the sustainability of services in small areas and their communities, not only through back office operations, but actually sharing of ministry and other resources. Because the current model is basically each place is on its own bottom, sucking resources away from others in an unsustainable way.
A lot of thoughts, so I'm going to be very succinct because this is enormous, and you've also just described the bulk of what my life is about to be like, truly. So I think there are a few things. One, I think there truly still is an opportunity in Colorado and Alabama for larger churches to start new churches. One. Two, I think there's communion for us, and hear me on this, because this is going to touch a nerve. The shift in the 1970s to having Holy Communion every Sunday is largely a good thing until it's not. Because all of those churches got used to having a full-time minister delivering the sacrament, consecrating the elements with you Sunday by Sunday by Sunday. So I think, and I don't know if anybody from Alabama is listening, we've got to loosen up just a little bit, and maybe people in far afield in the diocese might not have communion every single Sunday. Don't worry about that. The Lord is still present with you. Focus on the Word. And then you can go gather in certain places, maybe at your local parish, maybe in a more urban area, say quarterly or for certain feast days to get communion. But I think we've got to loosen up just a little on the delivery system Sunday by Sunday everywhere has to be communion. 2, and then 3, I think we want to maintain a robust confidence in the Episcopal Church that we can have ministries throughout the diocese that might not just be exactly a parish. It could be a feeding program. It could be a summer camp program where we're just amazing at offering that summer camp there. Like in Alabama, there's one going on in Sawyerville that's not really parish-based, but it's dynamic in one of the poorest parts of the state. So I think we got to look at, I think all of that is on the table, and I think we need multiple models for ministry that have depth and integrity, but might not always be as sacramental as the cathedral looks on Sundays.
From where I sit, from what you just said, a lot of the university-related theological schools have the resources that we don't have at ILIF. And so we're part of that group that you identified as not thriving as we could, because there are larger schools that are getting all the benefits. When it comes to the foundations and seeking resources, they will be happy to give to University of Chicago Divinity School and not so happy to give to ILIF School of Theology. The bigger schools get the bigger resources. So that's one way that I respond from my seat at home. Another response was the kind of conversations I've had with Bishop Kim, who is very aware of the smaller rural churches and the needs that they have. And so we've talked about how ILIF can help support those ministries and those persons who are gifted for ministry, not necessarily called to the priesthood, but can still serve. So how do we direct our resources? Whatever those resources may be understood to be, how do we direct our resources to serve the church?
Catherine and then Lynn.
My question was pretty much the exact same as Ames, and I was going at it from a different angle. And so I was going to pick on you, Richard, to say 48% of Episcopal churches that have a virtual model. I was like, that's pretty dang good, because why do they all need it? They don't. That's where you start to collaborate, and then you take your funds that you would spend on anything to make it decent and put them in what you can provide locally and in person, because we shouldn't be threatened by the share. We should, and I know we do this a lot at ILIF, what do we bring to the table that's the most valuable? And what is disappointing is sometimes what ILIF brings or what the smaller school brings, they don't have the opportunity to give because they can't make it free. So I was thinking about that, and it's the nonprofit conversation all the time. How do we carve our spot instead of duplicating again and again when that's not what we do? So my commentary.
No, that's very helpful. And your word duplication, and I like that you said that it's parallel to what happens in the nonprofit world. I mean, that is what Episcopal churches for 50 years have largely done. That's been our mission model, is to duplicate the one parish, one full-time priest, one parcel of land model. That's been our model. And that only now works in at best 50% of the cases. And we need so many other models, including, Scott, the small batch model, what the Bishop of Texas called small batch ministries, which is that Bible study model. Lynn, Katie. Lynn and then Katie.
Okay. Hi, my name's Lynn Muth. Nice seeing you again. So my question, it builds on it though, is the idea of interfaith centers. So I've come from smaller, mid, and now large, and the cost and the attention on buildings and what people want to gather and share as one God, kind of holding that space in interfaith centers. Wondering your reaction to interfaith centers.
Interfaith centers. There is a place for that in the way I move in the world. So we have a relationship with the Interfaith Alliance here in Denver, and it's a growing relationship. My very first presentation at ILF, once I became president, talked about the importance of us recognizing that many people who walk in faith are walking in a faith of double belonging. And so there's interfaith in their very bones. If we don't recognize that, if we don't honor that, if we don't participate in that, we end up having folks live a life of secret as opposed to living a life of open faith. So I think that interfaith, we call it interreligious sometimes, is important. And we must always know who we are, why we believe what we believe, in order to not step on someone else. So I can be comfortable with any number of faith traditions because I'm comfortable with my own faith. If my God is so small that I always have to be apologetic and defensive and crush you, then my God is not much of a God. It's only because I believe in the greatness of God and my relationship with God that I don't have to try and diminish someone else. I was in a conversation, I'll say this, I was in a conversation with someone recently who talked about, I'll reframe it, that we can get so caught up in our ethnic identifications that we forget what it means to be human. That was their point. And I think I said last week that we really do need to be clear about humanity and what it means to be human. For me, is to be in relationship with others. And if I'm doing things that prevent me from being in relationship with others, not only am I diminishing myself as a human, I am diminishing the Imago Dei, because the Imago Dei is very much a part of what it means to be human and alive.
So
I'm Katie Pearson, and I have, I guess, more of a comment of gratitude rather than a question. One of the things I appreciate most about my time at ILIF is I am a lifetime Episcopalian. And the data says that more than 70 folks who sit in our chairs or pews are not cradle Episcopalians. They come from some other place and some other tradition. And I believe that Episcopalians are very prone to insider baseball. We have our words, our funny things, and we assume that everyone in front of us knows what we're talking about. And my time at ILIF really changed that for me. And there is nothing like sitting in a New Testament class with a Unitarian Universalist to make you realize that you are not all starting from the same place, and you cannot make assumptions of the foundation of what anyone else believes. And I think we fancy folk here in our vestments and beautiful building can sometimes forget that. And so I am forever grateful to how ILIF formed me as a priest for all the people, not just the people who claim to be Episcopalians for generations. So thank you for what you do and how you bring that ecumenism to life.
Thank you. And sitting in a New Testament class with a Unitarian Universalist being taught by a Jew.
So this will be our last question. Go ahead, Susan.
This conversation, I was not here last week, so I apologize if this was repetitious. This conversation, parts of it have brought to me something I heard on NPR yesterday, which was some discussion of the Gilmore Girls and how there is this whole community of people around the country that gather because they're Gilmore Girls fans, which is a program that used to be on TV, and I think you can still stream. And the whole point of this that I took away was people don't have community, and this provides them community. These are younger people, millennials, I suppose. And so the whole idea of community, I think, is the key. And somehow we haven't been able to bridge the gap between community that we can find in a congregation, and whether it's online or even some meeting occasionally and so forth, or whether it has communion every Sunday or whatever. I think belonging and community is most people's entrees, or what keeps them staying. So it seems to me there's some missing gaps in some idea about the secularization and looking for community outside of the obvious places where we could come into a church community and find belonging, as well as then maybe spiritual growth and a desire for social justice. So I was just curious if you recognize that gap or you see that.
Recognized, yes. Explore it, not always understanding it completely, because that's the social media phenomenon of folks. Good morning, Facebook family. where folks are more comfortable being family in a social media app than being family in this kind of way. And so one of the things that the pandemic brought to the fore, we had to change our primary fundamental definitions of what it means to be human, because being human has always meant being in close relationship. We had to change our understanding of what it meant to be the church, because church has always meant Sunday morning at 10 or 11 o'clock. Well, during the pandemic, we couldn't get together. And because we couldn't get together, we were like, what does it mean for me to be in relationship with another when I can't touch them? I can't hug them, which is a part of being in community, the church community. And so that then pushes me to really take another look at the folks who are most comfortable being family in social media. And what do we need to do to offer them ministry? And there are lots of online churches now that are not just tuning in to the worship at the cathedral, but they are developing a new kind of church reality. So these are all questions we have to face.
Before we thank Dr. Butler, thanks for being here. Warm welcome to everyone online, of course, and our service of Holy Eucharist begins at this same place, sjcathedral.org at 10:30 a.m. And then last but not least, let's thank Dr. Butler for being here 2 weeks.